He sees China as it's China's time to launch out on the world stage, to be a prominent influence, and to push back democratic values around the world where it can.
Actually, I think it's the first time you're in my studio here. We've done it by video. I think you've been over at Big Talker Studios, but it's good to have you here. Dan Palm. Dan, how you doing?
Great, Jeff. Good to be here.
Let's talk China. I mean, there's so much is going on. You, by the way, website danpalm.info. danpalm.info. You're always out there doing public speaking and giving your presentations on China, which I think we're starting to pay more attention to. I think more and more Americans can find it on the map, and our politicians understand where it's at and what the actual challenges are going forward and threats are going forward. I mean, give me your background again. I know we spent a lot of time in the past on this, Dan, but you spent quite a few years there. Talk about that, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts here.
Yeah, I grew up in the Verde Valley, Cottonwood, Sedona area. Much of my years there, came up to NAU and wanted to learn Chinese, Mandarin Chinese.
That's what everyone from Cottonwood, they're like, hey, I want to go learn Mandarin.
Exactly.
Hey, real quick, I actually toured a school. You know, I've been having the turmoil finding where to send my kids to. We did tour Basis.
Yeah.
And they're pretty highly rated.
Absolutely.
And if anyone wants to send me info about Basis, good experiences, bad experiences, one of them, the language is Mandarin.
Right,
that they
exactly.
teach there, which is not pretty unheard of, I think, in most schools.
Yeah, and it's a standard, I think, for Basis up here as well. But yeah, it's something that, Mandarin Chinese is certainly a language that if you want your child, son or daughter, to really be prepared for the future global economy and things like that, it's definitely a language to learn.
Yeah. Do you know some?
Absolutely. Yeah, I learned.
I know nothing.
I learned there I studied Mandarin Chinese for 2 years,
Okay.
20 hours a week.
Okay.
In a wooden chair and a wooden desk in an unheated room in Beijing, China.
Did they have like a ruler, and every time you mispronounce, they smack you?
They certainly were. It was a different kind of learning environment. Certainly,
Yeah.
I sat there with mostly Japanese and Korean students, and we studied Chinese, whether it was all aspects of it.
Okay, so let's step back. So from Verde Valley, you go to NAU, you learn Mandarin, you focus on Chinese, understanding China, and then you actually go over there at some point to learn more of the language, I guess, but also to do what?
Well, so what happened was NAU didn't have Mandarin Chinese at the time. So I asked my advisor, how do I learn Chinese? And he said, go to China.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I went over there for 2 years first to study Chinese, just pretty much solid. And I got a good handle of the Mandarin Chinese language, decent anyway. And then I was over there as well, actually on behalf of NAU, working for NAU to start to develop programs, academic programs there on the ground.
Wow.
I did that for another year and a half, and then they hired me to come back here to Flagstaff, and I worked here for 12 years at NAU. Okay. In different capacities through.
So you can learn a language as not as a kid, because kids learn this stuff quicker.
Yeah.
It's the younger they are.
Yep.
And I've heard that the older you get, the harder it is to pick up that stuff. Like I just couldn't. I guess I could learn Mandarin if I went there and was focused on it for a long time. Was it really hard?
It was super hard, but
Yeah.
if your next meal depends on it, if your friendships depend on it, you'll learn it. You've got to. I remember going into a place and trying to buy a train ticket, and just stumbling my way through it and getting the ticket I needed and just feeling so gratified by that because everyone around you is just speaking Chinese and you don't have a choice. You either sink or swim. So,
yeah. And I guess it's a little different because if you were to go to certain countries and the languages that are Latin based, like you could go to France and start figuring things out probably quicker, or Latin America or wherever, Germany.
Yeah.
But yeah, a little hard, totally different. No familiarity. Let's get that word between the langues. The base.
And what happens in Chinese is that there's only a limited numbers of sounds, and then they just put different tones on the same sound. But what makes Chinese really difficult is the written and the reading. So the writing and the reading, I should say, are the most difficult, and that's what makes it one of the most difficult languages in the world there with Arabic.
Yeah.
Because that's the part that if you can't read a menu, if you a restaurant, if you can't order something offline or whatever, or look at a website, you really are hamstrung with regards to your abilities.
Yeah.
So you have to focus in on the writing and the reading and the speaking and the tones. I mean, it's intense. That's why
I noticed that when I was in Hong Kong, which obviously has a huge amount of English and all that, and then also Vietnam, which is also strange because they had the French influence, so that it's different. But still, it was hard communicating and saying, "Hey, I want that item."
Oh yeah,
I want, because it's totally different cultures. So, and folks talking with Dan Palm, what did you learn besides the language when we talk culture and differences between, say, the West, the U.S., Europe, for example. What are some of the main differences? And we're going to get into communism and all that and the economic system. But I mean, if you were to take away after the years of being there, what would you tell the average person out there who may have never been there or may never go there?
What I would say is that the average Chinese person is just like you or me, trying to figure out a future for themselves and their family, trying to get ahead in any way they can. And they are constrained by a system that is autocratic, that is all present, that is censoring their online content they see and what they can access and what they can produce and put out there. They're at risk of prison.
That's different
or jail.
than here. Maybe it's not the government here. It's it's the big companies and the social media giants.
True.
Here.
I think the players are different, but certainly the knock in the middle of the night, I think that's a little different than here in many cases. This idea that
literally that could happen if you put out if you were a me in China or even a you who said, "Hey, I don't like this. What you're doing, President." Right. How do you pronounce the president's name? Xi. Say it again. Xi. Jinping.
Yep.
Do we have that right? If I was to criticize heavily, and you could literally have a knock on the door.
You'd be off the air. I mean, you'd be off the air.
We'll never get on there.
You'd just be brute forced off the air, and then you would be arrested. And the thing that happens is that just like when students or others come over here and they start talking up democracy and they start criticizing China from here on Twitter. Well, the Chinese government, the CCP, is actually monitoring Twitter. It's actually monitoring these sites. And then they'll get phone calls here in America saying, and this has happened on multiple occasions.
Chinese citizens?
Chinese citizens will get phone calls here saying, you need to knock it off. Otherwise, your family that's all back in China is going to suffer from this.
Oh, my.
And so this is happening, students at Harvard, it's documented, students all across the U.S., where the Chinese government is actually monitoring their behavior here in the U.S., and then your family pays the consequences, or when you come back, they arrest you.
Just think about the apparatus size to do that, to monitor all that. I'm sure a lot of it's AI and technology as well, but that is an immense background police state thing going on.
It's enormous, Jeff. I have been over there. You drive by these buildings that are just this massive hole of concrete with these small windows, and there's thousands, tens of thousands. I mean, the number I've heard is there's 300,000 employees that are monitoring the internet and every activity. And then they require companies as well to monitor their own blog posts, that are coming through. So there's multiple layers. See, private companies are required, like Weibo, WeChat, and others, they're required to self-censor.
Monitor their employees and themselves.
And anybody who posts on their site. So they have their own censorship bureau within their private company, if there's such a thing as a private company in China, which we could talk about. Then secondarily, you have the government apparatus, which is tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people who are actively monitoring the internet through the use of AI and keywords. So as an example, he looks a little bit like Winnie the Pooh. This is a really funny thing that if you put a picture of Winnie the Pooh and the picture of the leader of China, they look very uncannily similar.
Yeah, okay. And so, he probably doesn't like this.
Right. So they actually censor Winnie the Pooh in China. If you type into their search, Winnie the Pooh, because what happens is the people who are criticizing him will not call his name out online. They'll say, the short for Winnie the Pooh. And if they put his name, then the AI will pick up on that somebody is criticizing him and they come after you.
Okay.
But if you put
Winnie the Pooh is in that.
Yeah. So Winnie the Pooh is at it again. Everybody knows that means that the leader of China is at it again, right? So he's very sensitive to any pictures of Winnie the Pooh. He's very sensitive to any mention of this. So you can't actually search this on and get his picture. And there's all these kind of keywords. So what the average citizen does that wants to be involved in the dialogue, somebody like yourself or myself, we would start to use a lot of code words for certain things.
But they'll pick up on that eventually.
But they pick up on it and then they censor it.
Censor that.
That's right. Exactly.
That's amazing. I mean, for all the problems, and I was talking with someone about the Section 230 on the social media stuff here and how there's, I know the former President Trump was suing. There's a lot of people who brought this up in Congress. That's a problem here, but it pales in comparison to the apparatus of the state over there in China.
Well, the difference here, I would say a key difference to think about anyway, both of them have major issues, and I don't support either of this kind of censorship, obviously. But it's like taxes, right? If you don't pay them, people with guns show up. In China, which is different typically than here, if you say something you're not supposed to, people with guns show up. Whereas what we have is corporations who are censoring you, but they're not showing up at your door to arrest you. Yeah. So that's a whole nother level of oversight that when a government maintains and controls the internet, that they have the guns, the weapons, and all the infrastructure to really make your life miserable.
And the people have no way of standing up to that over there. I mean, over here, you do have the Second Amendment, for example. Right. There's 300 plus million firearms out there with 330 odd million people. It's over there. I would imagine nobody owns any
you're not
kind of
allowed
firearms.
to. You're not allowed to own a gun over there. Some farmers are allowed to own a small, like a pellet gun or a 22 if they're keeping birds or other things off of their crops. But it's highly regulated, and there's no way that the average person has a weapon.
Yeah. All right, Dan, let's do this. I got to take a break, and I want to get into today's communism, I guess, Chinese communism, what that means. Yeah. Starting a business in China, we've talked about that in the past, plus President Xi's comments that he made recently. To me, it signifies they want to be that top dog out there and what that means going forward. And folks, if you have any comments, I'd love to hear from you. Plus, you can go to Dan's website, danpom.info, danpom.info. And also, I'd love your text comments. 877-971-3971. 877-971-3971. We have Fox News coming up top of the hour. Then we're going to continue on with Dan Pom, talk more about China, and then try to get to some of your comments. Hang tight. Back in a couple minutes. All right, welcome back, and thanks for continuing to listen. Jeff Orvitz here, and I'd love your comments. The Just Wireless text line is open for you. Go ahead and chime in, and I'll work those comments in as soon as I can. 877-971-3971. 877-971-3971. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Go to talkwithjeff.com. All your favorite podcast providers, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music. Please subscribe, and please share that as well. We were just talking about Dan Pom's time in China from Verde Valley. Then decides to go to NAU and learn Mandarin, which wasn't easy. Then spends a couple years over in China learning it more, learning the Chinese culture and all that. And it's so different. And they have communism, obviously, for quite a while. But I don't think it's your 1960s, your 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s style communism.
Right.
Can they even call this communism?
It's communism
anymore?
Yeah, see, I think the way I used to think about communism is it was either you took all of it or you took none of it. But the way I've come to understand it, and by being there as well, is that you really have to divide up communism in the same way we think about other forms of either political power or structures that exist, economic and social. So there's the three parts of communism. There's which is what we're used to, right? The USSR was our most recent example of kind of economics, social, and political are all communism through and through. Karl Marx all the way. Yeah. But the Chinese did something
and failed miserably.
Yeah. And so we're used to this. Okay, here comes another communist group. They're gonna rise up. They're gonna kill half their population, which is what happens typically, and then they're going to fail. And what the Chinese did was something really interesting in that they started to adjust their system economically, but not politically. So they maintained a communist political apparatus, but economically they started to move more capitalistic and more socialistic. And so they have their own form, actually, of economics that is heavily state-run. And we're seeing some of that in the U.S., actually. The U.S., I believe, has been learning some things from China and their economy about a structured economy, where it's always going up, where the government's always goosing the economy through some type of active participation.
Stimulus, this and that, and universal basic income.
Exactly.
All that. Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, okay, why call it communism then? I mean, isn't it a dictatorship? Isn't it, when the government gets involved with corporations, isn't that more fascism? When they're kind of in cahoots together, why is it even called communism at this point?
Because I think the fundamental values, the core values, at least politically, are to be more to align with the idea of this communal structure, this communal society. In some ways, the redistribution still exists in high numbers.
Okay.
Also, it's a system that has been around now, at least in China, for 100 years. They just celebrated their 100th year, not in power, but as an organization. And so they don't want to go away from that and suddenly call themselves something else. So there's a need to some continuity to stay with that. And
but it's not like Mao would probably be like, "What did you do?"
Mao would just flip out. Yeah, I mean, with regards to what happened.
How does it work? Okay, China has 1.4 billion people. What would you say what is the size of the middle class approximately? A few hundred million?
Yeah, likely it's a few hundred million. I mean, I would think I would think it's 300 to 400 million, but I don't know exactly. You have large cities that are a lot of affluence going on. You have Starbucks on every corner, just like you see here in the U.S. in many regards. You have some places you even have a Home Depot. You have Costco, things like that. So there's a rather large middle class.
How's that work then with, let's say you're a Chinese citizen, Dan, and you start a business or whatever. Yep. You probably have to be partners with the Chinese government, but you can become wealthy. I mean, how does that work in communism? I'm still trying to wrap my arm.
So this is where they went more capitalistic with regards to business. So people can own their own businesses outright.
Okay.
If you're selling, let's say you're selling iPhone cases, the government is not going to be terribly involved in your organization unless it gets quite large or quite influential. So what happens is you can just go about your business and pay your 25%, 28% tax on everything that you sell and everything that you do, and the government will just pretty much, honestly, leave you alone.
Is that the tax rate?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a little more over here, I think.
It's quite a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they have VAT tax as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you were putting it all together, but the income tax is 25%.
Yeah, when you sell it, when you sell the case, you pay X percent
Yep.
In a national tax.
That's right.
Basically. Okay.
Yeah, and then you have your own profit tax, which is like your income tax. It's around 25 to 28%.
Do they get money from like universal basic income? So do they get a monthly base income from the Chinese Communist Party? How does that work?
The poor would. Yeah, they'd have insurance with regards to medical.
Any good?
No, not very good in the rural areas. Not at all. Okay. And then the basic income would be just so you don't starve. It's not significant.
So here's $100. You can buy rice and some other.
It's pretty
essentials.
awful. I mean, the life you would live on government assistance is miserable.
Yeah.
But at least it's not. You're not dying.
I mean, not to divert too much here, but it should just be, if there was anything, it should be you better get to work because this is going to get you a cup of rice and just barely get by. Not sit on the couch and watch Netflix all day, and hang out.
Exactly.
Type of money.
Yeah, and that's definitely the Chinese understanding. And I mean, that's definitely you want to incentivize people to work because for obvious reasons. So one of the ways in which Chinese have gained an enormous amount of wealth is through real estate. This is something that a lot of people don't know is that you're allowed to own real estate. You're allowed to own houses. And I say houses with an S because they own 2, 3, 4 houses. And what happens is, or usually they're apartments. And what happens is the cost of those have gone way up, staggeringly so. When I was there, you could buy a square meter in 2003, 2005 for about $1,000 a square meter.
Okay.
So and now you buy it for about $40,000 a square meter.
So it went from 100,000. Is my math right here?
I think so, for 100,
to millions.
Oh, many, many millions. Yeah. So if you owned a basic...
If you're in a city and if you're in some place you want to be.
That's right. So if you're in downtown Beijing and you bought a place for a couple $1,000s a square meter 15 years ago, and you own that now, you are a multi-millionaire. I mean, you're buying all of the nice products. You're driving a, Maserati.
Do they have a modern real estate system over there where, here it's pretty clear. I can go to the county records. I know, Dan, you own this or that. And it's clearly, okay, I'm transferring this deed to this person in a sale. I mean, is it like that?
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. The catch here is that the communists, back when they were opening up, some years ago in the 90s, this was part of some of the legislation they did, is that they only allow people to own the property for 70 years.
Okay.
So what's really interesting is when the property's initially sold, it's allowed to be owned for 70 years. And they did this because they didn't want to go full capitalism. They didn't want to give away land because state ownership of land is a fundamental core value of communism. And that's that communal piece, right? So they couldn't give up the land. The government wouldn't allow you to actually own this outright. You can own it for 70 years. And then the question is, well, what happens after 70 years? And the government would say to you, well, we're going to fix that in 50 or so years.
We'll work on that.
Yeah, but give us some time. And
but the problem is you get closer. I've seen this with ground leases here in the U.S., where you have a building that you own the building, the improvements, but the ground lease, as you get decade after decade, you have a problem.
Yes.
Because there's only 10 years left, for example.
Yes.
But I have this $4 million building on here, and the owner of the ground lease is like, yep, you do. So
exactly.
Yeah, will they fix that? I don't. Is it still that case?
It is still that case, and they're going to have to fix it in the next 20 or so years. If they don't, they're going to start seeing a mass depreciation of property values, you're talking about.
Are there a lot of foreigners buying? Like, could you go over there and buy an apartment as an American?
I could not by myself. No, I would need to have a Chinese person buy it with me. and they would hold the deed. Actually, my name likely would not be on there.
That's a little sketchy to me.
It is. Yeah. And actually, when I was actually looking at property to buy in 2005.
When you were there,
yeah, because the value was just unbelievable. But I wasn't able to and didn't end up buying. I didn't have the money.
Too bad you couldn't have figured it out. Yeah, that's always the case. Is when you want to get in
and then
on
you
that
have the
deal.
other problem of actually getting money out of the country. So they have all these rules about allowing
currency restrictions. And,
So this is part of the way in which they have goose their real estate market is because they don't allow companies to take money out in large amounts unless it's under very specific reasons. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of these large corporations, ones we know that are U.S. corporations, are actually investing in real estate in China to hold their dollars, like they're doing in the U.S., by the way, at this time as well. So it's part of the reason why the real estate is taken off there. And I think there are some similarities to what we're seeing here in the U.S. right now with regards to where do you park your assets. Not that the U.S. government limits where you can take your dollars, in or outside.
But they tightly control it and monitor it. Take $10,001 out of the country, you better report that.
Exactly.
But you can take it out. It is funny though that the amounts haven't gone up for a long time, even though the value of the currency has gone down.
Right.
But it still remains. So okay, there's probably a real estate bubble over there. Then it sounds like, because it's also a trapped kind of controlled market. Once you're in, it's kind of hard to get that out because of the currency controls.
Right. And so if you're making good money over there as a foreigner, you're going to have to figure out how to reinvest that in the country. You can take some of it out, but you're going to have to leave a large amount. So people start going into, investing in real estate, investing in other new companies.
Yeah.
And that kind of keeps the economy going. If the Chinese government ever changes those laws and allows for larger currency, or they want their own currency to become a global currency, they're going to have to loosen that. And that would mean more dollars coming out of the country likely.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. And they don't let their currency freely float like other currencies as well. They have it pegged to some degree. Absolutely. It might float a little bit now, but it's I'm not totally up on that.
And they use it as a political weapon. They've used it with the Bush administration to get actual favors in other ways. They said, we won't allow our currency to go up if you do this, right? And so they actually used to use it as leverage. And Trump was the first one that in my lifetime that I know of that came along and said, that's BS.
Yeah.
You just need to figure this out. And if you don't, we're gonna
Are we back to business? Let me step back a little bit. And folks, talking with Dan Palm, danpalm.info. If you want to check out his site, he does public speaking all over the place. And Dan, I think we made a big mistake going back to, I think you go back to Clinton, Bush, you're talking about the allowance into the World Trade Organization. And they should have put the stipulations, where's the balance? Okay, if you're a Chinese person, you could come over here and buy real estate.
Right.
You don't need to have a partner. If you want to buy real estate from me, we're not partners. I'll sell it to you.
Yep.
You could come start a business. And I don't have to, because over there, you told me in a past interview that if I want to go set up a company over there in a certain size, I have to have a Chinese partner. Correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. And they have to own 51% of your company.
Yeah, so 49% is not a good place to be when you're doing all the work and it's your company. Believe me. So why didn't they put in the fairness between, hey, okay, you can come over here, buy real estate. We can go over there, buy real estate. So, and is there talk of balancing this out now? I think they made a tragic mistake there.
Yeah, I mean, for years it's going to take, the message was from upper administration, this is a Clinton administration, the Bush administration and others, give China some time. They're coming from, communism, and they're trying to figure themselves out, so we're going to let them in the WTO, early 2000s, I think it was, or late 90s, and then they're going to come along. They're going to come around, and we're all going to get along and work together.
Sure.
And what happened was the Chinese, and I mean this quite objectively, honestly, they realized very quickly that, and so did Western countries, that the opportunities economically in China were massive, like nothing people had ever seen, particularly in certain industries. And so what happened was the Chinese economy just became so large and so appealing to the West that we were drunk on it, basically. And so we were blinded by all this currency that we could, and this profit we could make, and we allowed the Chinese to kind of do what they wanted to do on the restriction side and create a very unbalanced market and a very unbalanced kind of system between them and the world. And so that's where I think when Trump used to say, he blames our leaders for a lot of these problems with China.
They're stupid leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is 100% true. I was thinking this before. We're the stupid ones who just looked at currency, and the Chinese knew it because they once the economy got to a certain size, they knew that they could pretty much call the shots.
It was too late.
Exactly.
And that's my question, I guess, for you, Dan, is let's say you are a major car manufacturer and you moved your manufacturing of the entire cars or parts or whatever, any industry over to China because you were drawn to the low labor costs. Right. Maybe they have even a lower corporate tax. Who the heck knows? But overall, more money in your quarterly reports. Stock looks good because you're able to shed the expensive labor costs and et cetera, right. Regulatory costs of the United States. So they did that. We saw that through the 2000s. Get your business over there. Get your business over there. Right. Now they're over there. They've got a factory they invested $1 billion into or whatever.
Right.
And we hear this talk about bringing it back to the U.S. It sounds like to me that's not going to happen because they're trapped by that system over there. You're just going to abandon $1 billion factory, for example, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and the other piece is this, that the Chinese government, after a while, once you've invested and once they've enticed you in, they'll actually put restrictions that your cars won't be sold in the country unless they're built in the country. Things like that. So all of a sudden you've got, Ford has its big manufacturing in Chongqing, China, down in the south. Mm-hmm. And they're in a similar situation, whereas if they're not building in China, these cars are not going to be sold.
Okay, so the domestic market in China, and if there's hundreds of millions of middle-class folks, they want to buy a Ford or a Chevy or whatever.
It's enormous.
So, yeah, these companies like these big, huge U.S. companies are like, well, I'm not going to piss off that market because now I've got to actually manufacture the car in China. Another unfair difference between the two markets because you've got to manufacture that Ford here if you want to sell it here.
Yep.
You can't bring it over from wherever they do cars now here in the U.S. Whereas they could come over here and manufacture something and sell it right to our market. There's no or sell it straight from China. Well, we see the container ships coming in all the time. There's no restriction on that.
Well, this is part of the USMCA that was really, I think, one of the key parts of it. And that was
USMCA. Remind.
Yes, this was the U.S. Mexico Canada Commission agreement, basically that put together new rules and basically when NAFTA was petering out after 25 years, this reorganized it under the Trump administration to think about trade in new ways. And one of the things that came out of that is they increased the percentage of a vehicle that needs to be made in North America in order for it to receive certain tax credits and certain classifications. And so that's where it went from 60-something% to actually 70, I think close to 75% now. So 75% of any vehicle that is sold in the U.S., in order for it to receive a tax incentives and things like that, has to be built in North America. This is why you see Lucid Motors setting up down in Casa Grande, because there's a supply chain coming out of northern Mexico.
Okay.
And so anything that's built in North America and sold in North America has an advantage over something built and made in China.
So we're waking up to a degree.
Exactly right.
But is it too little too late in your years of experience with China, or is it just the beginning of that awakening, I guess?
This is a long game. Yeah. So I don't think it's ever too late in the sense of how do we make a difference in the next 5, 10, 50 years. I mean, I think we are waking up on both sides of the aisle to what we have allowed, honestly, and what the politicians and others have allowed to happen in our lifetime, which has been in some ways criminal, to prioritize other economies, to prioritize other business, to think that if we help another country or work with another country, that they will rise peacefully. This whole idea, and now we're in a situation where we're combating with them economically, we're combating with them militarily at some point, although they're not quite there yet. We can talk about some of that, Taiwan, South Tennessee,
I want to talk about that. Let's do that. I want to take a quick break. We're talking with Dan Palm. Check out his site, danpalm.info. I want to get into President Xi's remarks recently and where you see this heading worldwide with, look, they've got money now, they've got power now, so the natural order of things usually is they want to be that top dog, in my opinion. Right. So I want to get your thoughts on that. And folks, I want to get your thoughts as well. Text them in, 877-971-3971. Back in a minute. All right, Dan Palm is with me, and his website, danpalm.info. I was watching, or at least reading about Chinese President Xi. Pronounce it. Let me turn you on there.
Yeah, President Xi.
Okay. Xi
Yep.
Okay. Jinping, he was declaring in front of, this is from, where did we pull this from, AP or ABC News, declared in front of tens of thousands gathered in Tiananmen Square that foreign powers attempting to bully his country will be bashed, and that they'll be met with a, quote, great wall of steel, and many other things that he said in this. The rhetoric and language has definitely ratcheted up in recent years and even months. Because, Dan, it seems like they used to be much more quiet, that they hunkered down, they were minding their business, they were building their capital, they were building that infrastructure, and now the rhetoric, though, seems much hotter. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, it is, and I think the Chinese would say so as well, like the average citizen would say so. This is a direct, in my opinion, a direct product of Xi as a leader. He comes out of, his father was part of the kind of first communist administration in China under Mao Zedong. When the communists took over in October 1949, his father was part of that whole apparatus, and so his father was actually banished to southern China. He got in trouble, and he was banished to southern China, so the whole family had to move down there, and was not in with the party for a long time.
Okay.
He's come back, and so he sees China as it's China's time to launch out on the world stage, to be a prominent influence, and to push back democratic values around the world where it can. And so the rhetoric certainly has elevated quite substantially, and I think it's because the cat's out of the bag. People know from documents that have come out of the Chinese government, the 2025 plan was the most egregious, basically saying that they wanted to take over every kind of bit of technology that the West had, that anybody had, and be number one in those things, whether it was semiconductors, whether it was new energy, whether it was aeronautics, whether it was shipping, logistics, whatever it might be. And they had a whole list. And so this kind of was a new, prouder, externally prouder China, and they have
letting them know.
Yeah, they're putting people on notice, basically.
Yeah, this isn't in the back room anymore. This is out in public. On the semiconductor side, if you want to control the chips, and we're seeing this problem in the U.S. with chip shortages, because people don't realize this. Most of this stuff's coming from Taiwan.
Right, Taiwan and Japan.
There's the main manufacturing of chips in the world. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's super high. It's right there in Taiwan.
Yeah, it's in the, it's well over 50%. I think it's closer to 80%.
Centralized. It's crazy. So give us a quick, why is Taiwan there? And Taiwan is Chinese people, correct? And talk about that.
So Taiwan became the haven for the previous government. This is more modern history, obviously, in the 40s. The national government that was in control when the communists started to battle with them, and then kind of post-World War II, that government escaped to Taiwan and defended the island, and Mao, who was the first leader of the Communist Party in mainland China, left Taiwan alone, but said it was part of China, and one day we would take it back.
Come
basically.
back. Okay.
And so Taiwan has grown over the years. It was the symbol of modernization, and I've been there once or twice. It has aged quite a bit, and it is having its own challenges, certainly, while the mainland of China has grown exponentially, economically, and in other ways. And so it is now become, in some ways, sadly, a bit of a pawn between the East and the West, between China and much of the Western countries. And as Chinese military continues to grow, this is going to be extremely problematic for Taiwan. Taiwan is just 100 miles off of the mainland China, if you can imagine that.
And it can't be a couple million people. I
think it's 4 or 5, but I can't remember.
So if China wants Taiwan, the U.S., obviously there's a presence.
There is a presence.
Very, very minimal.
So this is part of China's overall plan. If you read the documents that the U.S. And think tanks put out, it's basically that the way in which a superpower comes to be is that they started to create around their own country these, especially in the ocean, these deny access zones.
Okay.
And so what this does is it denies access to foreign ships.
Like a blockade.
Particularly military ships, exactly.
Okay.
And what they do that through missiles, they can do that through their own ships, they can do that through all the fishing vessels. So China's very interesting. They're very crafty in this way, that they're not using military vessels to go out and claim this land and do these things in most cases. In some cases they are. But they're using fishing boats, which are actually, they say, are staffed by all government people. But they use, this idea of fishing as, this is a fisherman that's out there, protecting their reef or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so this is part of what we're seeing, where Taiwan represents, number one, you understand the issue with Taiwan. You have to understand also that Chinese, post-World War II, this was a catastrophe for them. Whereas the U.S., this was a high point where we had defeated Nazi Germany, we had defeated the Japanese and others. It's a huge high point we look back to. 1945 was a catastrophe for China. And so they were invaded through those years by the Japanese, by so many other different countries and others, and abused in many ways. And I think that's a fair assessment. And so they're very sensitive to anyone talking about their land or their space where they exist, or having anybody tell them what to do. They just have a chip on their shoulder.
The Japanese were brutal on mainland
Absolutely
China.
brutal.
I mean,
Absolutely brutal.
History shows that. And so now, though, they feel, and probably hundreds of millions of Chinese, I'm sure there's hundreds of million that can't stand their government, just like many people around the world.
Oh, certainly.
But there's hundreds of million that are living a good life, more probably than the whole population of the U.S., to be honest with you. Yeah. So certainly. They're looking at it as, hey, our time has come, and they have this leader who, the president really, you have the Communist Party, and really throughout history, even when you have dictators, there's always someone behind them. There's always a group of people typically. And if you piss them off too much, you get ousted or worse. We've seen that time and time again. But he's essentially a dictator, right?
He is. He has effectively worked with his group to change the laws of China, the Constitution of China, to allow him to serve as president indefinitely.
Okay.
And this is the first of any of the kind of post-Mao, the first.
And Mao did it, right?
Mao did it as long as he wanted to be there, as long as he was there. And actually, he was even going crazy mentally, and was still in leadership, which was a problem for the country. And so afterwards, it was typical for the premier or the president to serve for 2 terms, which are each 6 years.
Okay.
And so that's what every other leader has followed until him. And he's the 5th one since Mao. And so he now can serve indefinitely as the leader of China.
He's not going anywhere.
And he's not going anywhere.
How old is he?
He's in his 60s.
Okay, so he could be there for a long time still.
Absolutely, and I think he will be. And I think part of his step is he wants to be seen as the leader that reunified China. And I do think that he'll take action on Taiwan in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think he wants to be seen as that. And also I think that he will use this. It will really depend on whether or not the country internally is in a good spot or not. And if they're not, I think issues with Taiwan will get more pronounced in a way to distract people.
There's a downturn.
Yeah. And that's the way, the Chinese...
Taiwan's fault.
Yeah, well, and the Chinese have remained in power because they've helped the economics of the country just continue to go up with this managed economy. And so if that was ever to falter, their main reason for being in power would start to be questioned. And that's when I could see them turning very quickly to Taiwan to distract internal dialogue away from themselves and onto unification.
And as a point here, the U.S. obviously is protecting Taiwan. They're not going after Taiwan because of the U.S., but if we start having economic problems and you look out 10 to 15 years and all the troubles we have, what are we going to really do about that when you have this growing Chinese military? I presume they're growing by leaps and bounds. It comes to a point where what do you do? Do you go to World War III? Over Taiwan. And I think is that the gamble? Is that the bet that the Chinese are probably going to make eventually?
The gamble right now, I think, is that the Chinese government is not quite ready militarily to really be able to secure Taiwan. They're able to attack it all day long and blow it into pieces all day long. But can they secure it and really make it their own without major problems? That's
the
first
clock's
piece.
ticking on that.
Yeah, that's right. The second piece is economically. I think this is why the economic sanctions that Trump has put on there and his administration put on there were so critical, because they sent a signal to China that if you continue down this road and you invade Taiwan, you do these other things, we will continue to leverage along with the world economically and cause you great harm. And that's the number one way you can get the communists to have a problem. A communist government is an economic problem on mainland China, would send the country into politically a tailspin.
Yeah, you would have internal strife and all of that. And finally, it's not just the U.S. though. China has built relations with the European Union all over the world. We've talked about this in the past. Resource plays, buying up land, buying up commodities, raw materials, etc. They're everywhere. They're making a global play. It's not just, we have a relationship with the U.S. It's everywhere.
That's right.
And that's not going away.
No, that's not going away, and that's what they view as this is part of, what they believe is their march towards being a superpower is first you gain primacy over your region. Then you are working around the world to gain influence, and then you start to gain primacy in larger areas of the world. Right now, they're working on the South China Sea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, that whole area to gain primacy of the oceans there, to gain primacy of the resources there. And then once they can have that, which will be in the next 5 or so years, then they can start to move in other manners that are much more global. And that's what they're setting up now with the purchase of steel and Eastern Europe steel manufacturing, other things that they're doing. This is all meant to the Belt and Road Initiative that's supposed to go through much of Central Asia up into Northern Asia, and of course, not Asia, Northern Europe, and then into Western Europe.
They're cutting across there, direct connection.
It's telecom, it's cars, it's infrastructure, it's all encompassing, and they're investing trillions of dollars in that because they understand that that's the next stage they need in place once they gain primacy regionally.
Man, the 90s were a unique time in history. The U.S. was in an awesome position for a while. But I'm glad, though, that people are waking up, and hopefully we can figure this thing out going forward. Dan Palm's available he does guest speaking all over the place. And if you want to get in touch with him, go to the website, danpalm.info. I know you do a wonderful presentation when you're out there. So check it out, folks, danpalm.info. Appreciate it. Fascinating stuff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. All right, folks, and that's it for today. You can also go to my website, go to talkwithjeff.com. Send me a message, and we'll get you on air, get your comments on air. Plus, while you're there, subscribe to the podcast. Click on how to listen, and all the links are there for Spotify and iTunes and Amazon Music. I don't even know how many are. There's so many of them out there now, so click on that. And have a great, safe weekend. Have fun out there. Enjoy the wonderful weather. I guess the hot weather, though. And we'll be back Monday at 4:06, and we'll see you soon.